Okay, welcome back to Zbrush. This is the walkthrough of the Scapulo Humeral rhythm exercise. That's a mouthful, but here we go. So this is pretty much where we left off with the previous session, but now we're in time lapse, and I can go through this a little bit quicker. Spare you guys some of the pain. Pretty much we have all the layers that we set up before. So the different articulations of the shoulder. So 0 to 180 degrees. And our mesh is, as it came in, as the base mesh, so it's not been proportioned yet. And you can look at this and it's of average proportion, but he's got an interesting little flare in his hips that we'll have to take care of. I have my light box, spotlight over on the left-hand side with the reference images for each different pose, and I'll load those up and have those on screen as I go through, just so I can talk about it and you can look at it as we start to sculpt some certain features. Okay, so right now I really am just doing kind of a conforming pass on the proportions. You know, things like this measurement here as I go back is a chromium to a chromium, just to make sure his hip or his shoulders are the right width compared to his pelvis, which has the ASIS to ASIS measurement, the anterior superior iliac spine measurements. So we're just really adjusting these two widths. We're going to use this as our ground truth like we did previously. And then we're going to have to start to look and see where the chest muscles fall. Again, you can do all this by eye, which is kind of where we want to be eventually as artists. But a good fallback and just a good sanity check is to have some measurements to use. So as I go through this, I'm just really kind of doing small tweaks at level 0. Then I step up to just put a few concrete landmarks into my higher resolution mesh. This whole workflow for this exercise is in contrast to the Dynamesh stuff that we were doing, because as we proceed, we're going to have available to us all the subdivision levels. And so you'll start to see me go back and forth between them, between highest level right here, and then back to level 0. And level 0 is a great tool to really adjust proportions, adjust some edge flows, and to do kind of tweaks and manipulations to the contours, right, without having to worry about kind of the higher resolution details and how those interact. Whether they, you don't have to worry about preserving those because they'll ride along with your manipulations to the low resolution. Okay, so now I'm just looking at some measurements through the chest. I think I'm just measuring his arms right now. So I've done the measurement from the chromium process to the lateral epicondyle. So I'm going to make sure his arms are the right length down to the elbow, and just to make sure they fall in line at the right level with his thorax. Okay, so you again have the model sheet, so all this is available to you. Use it as much or as little as you need. It's just a good sanity check, like I said. So now I've brought up the reference, and I'm just going to match roughly the angles of the arms really quick. I will tweak these a few times as I go through, just to refine it, because some things the process from start to finish is one of continuous refinement. You'll see I'll do a lot of revisions to the big shapes at the beginning and get those in a place that I'm happy with. But I'll start to see problems with it as I go, and I'll have to go back and do further refinement. And that's always the way. You can only see visually so much at the very start until you've actually started to work into some of the interior forms and realized, actually, oh, this shape is wrong. Why is it wrong? Because my shoulders are a little too narrow, or the rib cage is a little too long. There's a number of things. So it's kind of like I said, it's continuous refinement, but you always have to progress and move forward and change things as you go. And actually, working digitally is very flexible that way because, like I said, we have level 0 available to us. So as we start to block in some of these things, if we find that the rib cage is too tall, We can go down to level 1 here and push this up, push some of these edge loops up. And the overall effect is that this form will be compressed top to bottom without losing any of its nice convexity or any of the details that we've carved in. So that really is the advantage of working with multiple subdivisions. Okay, so I'm blocking in obviously the spine of the scapula there. A little dot for my 7th cervical vertebra. Some posterior superior iliac spines, anterior superior iliac spines, and the iliac crest. Okay, this is really going to just be an initial block-in of the deltoid off of the shoulder girdle, right? So off of our nice S-shaped clavicle to the acromion, and then back down here. So this is literally going to block the front head in, going to block in the medial head, and then we're going to block in the rear head. And you can kind of get all these forms from the reference. Okay, but really, right now, I'm not trying to adhere to the reference. I'm just being quite schematic about my layout, putting things that I know need to be in there, and then I will refine them and make them match the reference, match the model as I go, right? So really just doing what I know first, and then I will make it what I see. So again, this is not quite the arms weak, but I'm getting the long head of the triceps blocked in. This is going to be the medial head of the triceps going here. Blocked in the olecranon and a little bit of the ulnar furrow, medial epicondyle of the humerus, and also lateral epicondyle of the humerus out here. You can see the lateral head of the triceps, kind of the big egg shape, and then the tail coming down, and ridge muscles kind of launching from the upper arm into the forearm, just above the lateral epicondyle. Okay, so right here, you've seen me turn my coloration back on my polyframe, and this is just simply to visualize for you that I've created polygroups, a couple separate polygroups to help me as I proceed. Hopefully everybody's familiar with polygroups. I don't have a lecture on those, but when you have areas that interact with each other, like armpits and arms pressed against the torso, it's good to be able to pull them off quickly, and that's why I set up polygroups this way. So I can block the inside of the biceps, the inside of the armpit separately. So just some broad strokes here, really laying in the forms and the schematic of the biceps and the deltoid. A little bit of skin bulge on his elbow. Okay. And now, moving forward, I'm just going to modify my polygroup so that I have two sides. And we're going to block in a little bit of the thorax, a bit about the obliques go in. And you can see me just doing a very schematic latissimus dorsi coming down. This actually isn't so visible on the model in any of the poses, as we kind of know it, this strong cord going down to the high point of the iliac crest. But that is a boundary for us, and this will set up kind of our serratus anterior poking out, and it will give us this volume coming back and give us kind of a good gauge for where the teres major needs to come off the medial border of the scapula. Right, so I'll put it in schematically, and then I'll rub it out and make it look natural as I go. Also, I want to get a good sense of the interlock, kind of the overlap of the obliques coming back and the lats going over top. So blocking in the teres major and the serratus. Okay, again, this is the asymmetry in our guy. He has 3 digits on this side, and he has 2 visible digits on the other side. See what I've just done here. So I've actually over-modeled these serratus a bit. They're a little bit too voluminous for me at this level. So rather than try to carve them down, a very simple way to do this, and leveraging again our subdivision levels, is to step down to level 1 or level 2, and I just put a little bit of a smooth brush on it, and that'll take some of the height out of the forms. So trapezius going in off the top border of the spine of the scapula, and the tail of the trapezius going down off kind of this little medial border, the intersection of the spine and the medial border. Some volume for the spinal erectors, and filling out a little bit of volume in the chest. Now, my original intention was only to do one side, but in the end I ended up doing both sides. So you'll see me actually start blocking this in quite rough through the chest and the back on this side. This side was my original intention was to finish this and leave this rough, but I got a little carried away and ended up doing both sides. I'm a fool for not using, well, I'm crazy for not using symmetry. Meaning that I like not using symmetry. I'd rather sculpt it twice than really just mirror it, because there's nothing natural about perfect symmetry. So often I'll sculpt it twice, for better or worse. I mean, obviously it's not a time saver, but the overall effect I think is better in the end. Okay, we've seen this kind of configuration in the abs before, the asymmetry of them. Locking in a bit of the neck. Just kind of really dancing around the surface right now, putting form in, just to break up the smoothness. Right now I've just gone in and dropped in the division between the sides of his abs, because it wasn't quite deep enough. In fact, there was nothing there. So now I'm using, rather than build up with clay tubes, I'm just trying to get some good convex volumes in here. So I've dropped down to level 2 and just using the standard brush, you can see here, to just do a quick stroke along it and really put a little height into the trapezius. And then at the same time I've taken the same brush and just dropped it down here to deepen the spinal furrow. Because that's actually a very strong characteristic of this guy in these poses, is that this actually becomes very deep, and he has pretty well developed spinal erectors either side. Okay, this is actually just going in and looking more closely at the reference to get some individual characteristics in. To take what I'd done quite schematically, what I know is kind of a configuration for the layout of the deltoids and teres major going down. Observing carefully the reference, you start to see, this is quite low resolution, but look at the high res stuff that was distributed with the assignment, and you can see that these forms start to blend over quite a bit. And anatomically, it's not true. As muscles, they don't blend, but sculpturally, with skin and fat, they start to merge together, and you get a nice wrinkle in the back of the armpit right there as well. Okay, this is me just quickly blocking in the side that I wasn't going to finish. So I'm really just trying to hash in the big planes and the big features. So refining the external obliques as they go back, putting a little bit of block into the gluteal muscles. What I've just done up here, as I step backwards for you, I've really just actually taken my clay tubes brush, set the depth, the embed depth to 0, and I'm just smoothing down some of the form that I've built up, because in this view, there's not a lot of activity here. In the trapezius or the rhomboids is quite inert at rest, so I'm taking some of the over modeling out, right? You always have to be careful when you're sculpting what you know that you'll over model it. I mean, you'll put too much form in, make it too big and too round, and you just have to remain vigilant because it's easy to do. Right now I'm using, doing a quick look at the width of kind of the axillary fold is what I call it, the armpit, the fold of the armpit in the back. And I'm just widening it a little bit to match what we have here. This right arm is going to be a bit of a nuisance for me because I wasn't planning on doing it, but I ended up doing it kind of half-heartedly. So it will lag behind for most of the exercise. Okay, on his back, this is a compelling reason not to use symmetry, right? Because the two sides are doing entirely different things. And you can see his right side is popped out, his scapula is popped off the rib cage a little bit, giving you a little bit more pronounced inferior angle. This one is quite flush with the rib cage. And so we have two different forms. And in fact, when we get to articulating his shoulders, you'll see that his scapula move fairly uniquely in comparison with each other. They don't mirror each other one-to-one. Okay, so that's the end of the first block. Just really kind of putting some form into the base mesh, and this is all at level 0, right? So from here we're going to go up to, well, let's see, I'll probably do some more, but the next stop is going to be to 45, and we will work additively from there. Okay, so just refining the abs. You'll see some funny things that I just kind of, as I was working quickly to get all this in, you'll notice some of these things are a little bit poorly done, and I'll eventually notice those and fix them at a later date, meaning they've gone a little bit too wide on his left-hand side. So I noticed those, and I do fix it, but it was kind of imperfect observation of mine to try to mirror what I've seen. But ended up doing it a little bit too overpronounced. So I'll have to fix that in the future. Likewise, I'll have to come back and fix his serratus on this side. Because with his arms down, his second digit isn't very visible. So when I put his arms up, I'll come back in and refine this configuration. And now I'm getting some of the characteristic shapes across the chest, the separation at the manubrium, the clavicular section. He has quite pronounced forms through here. So look carefully at the reference as you're working through this. You get the nice kind of flow of the clavicular section of the pecs out, and then you get a nice kind of volume here that comes across. And you can see it in front view very well. Okay, shape to the clavicle. His clavicle, the distal end, the lateral end, pops up a little bit out of his skin where it joins with the acromion. So he has this kind of popping up and this popping up. And I'm just blocking in some trapezius now, as well as refining the acromion. Why not a navel? Put the navel in, but I didn't ever eventually get to putting his nipples on. Okay, so here we go. We've just finished level 0, and now you can see I've actually ended up doing most of my edits on level 0 for building up the form. I was going to do it on a layer called base modification. This ended up just being my proportional changes. All my form went on level 0, and now I'm raising the arms with the transpose, and you can see I haven't actually done anything new. The stuff we blocked in the earlier video where I transposed it at level 1, that still transposes everything, including all the details that I've sculpted at the 0 degree level. So that's the beauty of having layers and transposing things at level 0, or sorry, level 1, is that all your higher resolution details will rotate with them. Right, so we don't actually have to do 5 sculpts. We do one pretty comprehensive block-in at level 0, and then we sculpt the modifications to the pose at each successive level. Okay, so arms up a little bit. His scapula haven't moved that much on the right-hand side. The lateral border is still, or the medial border is still fairly vertical. On the left-hand side, however, he has this crazy asymmetry in his scapular-thoracic rhythm, or scapular-humeral rhythm, and this goes like this quite early. So we have to attend to that and kind of make those adjustments. So you can see I've started to do it a little bit. So this guy is still rather vertical, and you can see I've tweaked this edge loop, this characteristic edge loop, to be a little bit more angled. I might have to push it even a little bit further and drop down this, which is the spine of the scapula. Okay, so right now I'm just trying to make characteristic adjustments to the area that has articulated. Right, so as the shoulder moved, different parts of the trapezius activate. Right, actually, there's some supraspinatus under here, underneath the trapezius, that's pulling the arm out to this level. Trapezius are starting to tense. On this guy, you can see the tail of the trapezius start to activate, whereas before you could see more of the rhomboids. That kind of gets pulled flat, so block it in the tail of the trapezius and kind of accentuating some of the muscles that are working. As we go forward, you'll notice that a lot of this stuff down here is going to be relaxed. We'll still get form in the teres major, but it's not going to pop out like we would sometimes expect, because all of the activation. So if I just change colors, and I'll erase this this ink, all of this down here in blue is going to be inert, right? That's all relaxing in the efforts to raise the arms, right? So all of the attention comes from up here. Right, so these are the muscles we have to attend to for flexion, and kind of for relaxation, it's all these guys, including the rear head of the deltoid. Right, the rear head of the deltoid doesn't activate when you're raising your arms to the side. It's mostly the medial head. So we have to pay attention to that and not over-define things. But as the medial head raises, pay careful attention to this contour, right? And look at your reference as you go in the rear view to see, because it changes as the arm goes from 0 to 45 to 90 and all the way up. So you'll see me flatten it down on occasion and then put some form back in. So another rule about working this way in layers and using them additively is that if you want to make an overall change to your model that's going to propagate through all of your layers, say you're working at 45 degrees as I am now, and I notice a problem, then I don't change it at 45 degrees. I go back to level 0 and put that into record mode and change it there, because then that will always be on, and it will go to 45, 90, 135, etc. If we just change it to 45, it won't be there when we turn off 45 and snap back to 0. I'll do that in a little while as I find things that need refinement, like the serratus. So what I'm just doing here is what I just talked about a few minutes ago, which is really looking carefully at the volume and the convexity of this head of the deltoid. Okay, so I've seen something, and I've just done what I've said, and I've snapped back to level 0 and gone into record mode to change. And actually what it is that I'm looking at the overall convexity of the chest and deciding that it's actually way too much. Like it's too barrel chested, so I'm going to take it, and using the move brush at level 1, I'm just going to push in the chest and make it a little bit less rounded. Also tweak some of the forms of the deltoids. Because again, I've put the volume in that I've seen, but I think I've over-modeled it. So you have to be eternally vigilant to that and kind of refine as you notice it. Okay, so I've made those modifications, and you can see I go back to 45 degrees and continue my working there. And I'll do that intermittently. Okay, stepping back a few frames, what you've just seen me do here is I'm taking the volume out of the chest, right? I'm adjusting this bottom contour, this bottom convexity, as the arms are raised, because as the arms are raised, the muscle gets stretched this way, right? And as the muscle gets stretched, as the insertion goes further away from the origin, the muscle gets thinner, right? So that's going to be one of the characteristic things that we have to attend to through this whole exercise is how far have the insertions of the pectoralis major moved from their default position, and how much is it stretched? Because then it gets thinner and thinner, and soon we're just looking at almost the contours of the rib cage. Okay, this is really refining the way that it inserts into the armpit, right? So we know all of this goes out here over the biceps, right? So we have pectoralis major, front head of the deltoid, and then we have, say, biceps coming up, and then related but slightly different, coracobrachialis, and then we have lats and teres major coming up here. And like we saw before, we have triceps, long head of the tricep going behind. Right, so that's what I'm trying to kind of refine. And that's going to be another area that you have to pay attention to as the arms articulate further and further up. So just trying to make it look nice. Also get the flow of the upper sections going the right way as the arm goes further and further up. And because I haven't used symmetry, you get to see me sculpt it twice, making this a little bit longer than possibly it needs to be. But in the back anyways, it's important because the back actually looks different.